So what's going on? Tell me a little about your game. How can I help you?
Well, hi, Jack. Really nice to meet you, and thanks for the time today.
Yeah.
And yeah, I joined Rotary Swing, learning a lot, so that's been awesome. And so yeah, I've played the game for a long time, and I played a little bit in college, and don't play as much now with kids and stuff. But I just suffering from some poor inconsistency, and would love to kind of shore up some fundamentals. So
Sure.
that's why I sought you out.
All right, cool. Well, tell me a little about your ball striking. What's going on when you're inconsistent?
Yeah, sometimes I hit it okay, but just I've noticed the shot dispersion's getting wider and wider, and I'm getting fat and a lot of pull hooks, some heel shots, and then I can hit push slices as well. So when I get over the ball, it could be 100-yard, dispersion. It just sort of depends.
That's pretty tough to play with. All right, well, let's you got a place you can make some swings back there and we can record them and see what's going on, or?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, why don't we start there? I'll record a couple and we'll see what we see. One more for me.
Got it.
And can you do one face on, just a practice swing? You don't have to hit a ball if you don't want.
Sure.
Okay, you got a great golf swing. That's got to be really frustrating to have a swing that looks that good and gets those kind of results.
Well, it's a very beguiling sport. Yeah,
it is.
It can be deceiving.
Well, the good thing is it's rarely as hard as we tend to make it out to be. We just got to figure out what's going on. But so let's take a look here. Setup looks pretty good. Takeaway is not bad. Lower body is not doing its job. So the great thing is your arms and shoulders and all of that stuff, positions and mechanics and plane and all that stuff is great. What's missing here is being able to use your lower body enough. Right here you get a little bit steep, and so the club's getting out in front of you a little bit, and this is where you're going to start to see the ball. You have a wonderful release, but the ball is going to start to be able to kind of go both directions a little bit. So, but this is pretty simple, actually. This is really just your lower body not leading enough in the downswing, which means it's not loaded up enough in the backswing.
Okay.
One more look at it. So this is going to be, you're going to be really, really easy to get going in the right direction here. Because right now your arms, yeah, she's get a little deep there. Again, a wonderful release, but your lower body is just kind of taking a little bit of a nap. And a good way to check this when you're practicing is kind of use this area back here. Your tush line will help you understand when you start to kind of get off a little bit with the arms. It's a really good gauge. So if you start to come off of it pretty early in the downswing, this is indicative of somebody firing their arms from the top, and you're starting to move away and you're losing it about halfway.
Okay.
So it's not bad at all. You actually got a really, really good swing. But what we need to do, let me just take one quick look face on. Stance width is just a hair wide for an iron. Okay, here's the issue. Okay. Watch your left leg. It just kind of slides. It doesn't really do much. Your left knee is a little soft. You're pushing quite a bit off the right, which is okay because you're not losing the tush line too badly, but the left leg is not getting posted up and out of the way, which means it's not working enough in the downswing. And that's why you're not shallowing out. You have a little tiny bit too much from the right. So let me show you how we're going to fix all this stuff, because you're going to be really easy. All right. So when you come down, there's three different ways that your legs work in the downswing, right? You can move laterally by pushing off the right, which you do. And that's why you see your foot coming up off the ground a little bit early, and you're losing the tush line just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
The second way is that you rotate, right? So we move, we turn our hips. And the third way is that we move up and down, right? And so you're kind of lacking the second two. You have great lateral movement. You're shifting really well. But when you're shifting and not turning from this left side and not pushing up into the ground off the left side, the left hip won't move back enough. And so what you're going to do, you're losing a lot of power there. What you'll notice in every single powerful ball striker on the planet, they will all tend to decelerate by pushing this left foot into the ground and create a tremendous amount of force off the ground on this left side. If we looked at yours, you kind of have and it's very subtle, the old school kind of softer knee. It's not really posting up, which would be pushing the hip back. And that pushing the hip back does two things. It rotates the hips with some speed, right? If you do this quickly with your left leg, you're going to get some speed. So then you can take some of the speed out from your arms. Your arms don't have to work as hard when this left hip is replacing that speed. So that helps a lot there, because then your arms don't have to get, as I was saying, you're getting just a little bit steep, a little bit, tiny bit over the top of the plane coming down. And then that's where you're seeing the ball going to want to go both ways. That's just because, again, you're trying to use your arms for power a little bit too much too soon in the swing. We replace that by getting that left hip to work. That left hip is posting up, going this way, moving your hip back. But also, where you're going to start getting more power is pushing up and getting that vertical force out of your legs. And so what we got to do to get that stuff to work is get that trained in your brain, that right off the ball, I want you to think of it this way. By the time your left arm is parallel to the ground in the backswing, you should have maximum amount of weight and pressure shift on your right leg done and be getting ready to go back to the left already. This is the important one. By the time your left arm is parallel to the ground in the downswing, you should have maximum pressure in the left leg. And right now, yours is still kind of just going, and it's not really, it's not turning, and it's not pushing, okay? And not pushing up off the left. So it's just, you wouldn't see, like, if you were measuring yourself on a force plate, you wouldn't see a big spike in this left side pressure by the time your left arm is parallel to the ground. It's just kind of slowly going over gradually. And we want that pressure spike so that you're getting ready to jump and push into that ground hard. So what you want to think about, by the time your left arm is parallel to the ground, that I want you to try and double your body weight and how much you're pushing into this left foot. When you do that, you're going to feel a lot more activation in your legs so that your legs wake up in the swing. Because right now, the right side's working, but the left side's not. And so we're going to start to really feel a big exaggeration in the left leg, where it's not only pushing up, but pushing the left hip back. Does that make sense?
It does, completely. Yeah, I've heard you talk about in videos where you really want to stomp down the left leg to wake it up, and I could see how that could be something I need to do.
Yeah, so as we start getting this to work, then we can start taking your arms a little bit more out of it at the top of the swing, because that's going to still get you a little bit steep. Your right arm gets a little bit away from at the top. You can totally play from there, but it's a tendency when the right arm gets away that you want to then fire it, because you're loading up this arm to be able to push coming down. So all we want to do, we'll worry about that kind of stuff later. That's just more of a fine-tuning thing. But I do want you to start to feel immediately off the ball that you're starting to learn to turn and use your feet and feel your feet pushing into the ground, especially like even off the backswing. To start to get loaded up early enough, you can use a little push off the left to start helping you load up your legs and wake up this left side, so that when you start down during that transition, that this side's already got some activation in it and it's ready to really pounce into the ground coming down. So what we're going to do at first is I want you just to get loaded up more with your legs going back, like immediately off the ball. You're trying to turn and shift and load your hips going back so that you're ready to really stomp that left foot. By the time this left arm is parallel in the downswing, it's really loaded up, and then we're going to work on getting it posted up going back. So we're going to go back and work on getting this transition move to feel like you increase, like double the pressure on your left leg during the transition. Let's take a look, see what we can feel like that.
Okay.
I'm going to have you practice that. All right. So show me, during the backswing, I want you to show me your hips and your legs way more loaded up immediately off the ball. And then I want you to show me transition where you can stop during the transition, but I want you to show me like how hard you could push that left foot into the ground.
Okay. Would you like me to do it without a club to start?
Let's do it without a club at first, just so we can focus on our lower body.
Okay.
Narrow up your stance just a little bit. This will make this a lot easier. Okay, good. Okay, so you're turning your shoulders there in the downswing. Relax your shoulders and focus just on your hip movement for right now.
Okay.
So you turned your chest quite a bit.
Oh, I see. I see.
Okay, good. Let your hips turn a little bit more and then your shoulder. Yep, there you go. Perfect. Now let's really try and sit into that left leg and create a lot of pressure on it. There you go. And then push it out of the way. Turn it, but not your shoulder. See how your chest is open there?
Okay.
Better. Good. Let's take a quick look at that. On the next one, I'll have you tilt the camera down a little bit more.
Okay.
So what did that feel like compared to normal?
Less shoulders, and it felt, yeah, a lot more squatting down into the left, and less, yeah, shoulder rotation and pushing up.
Okay. So the turn there looks good. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that you're doing what we'd call a little bit too much of a closed hip slide. So your hips need to begin to turn a little bit earlier so that we start creating some of that rotation soon. That rotation needs to happen early in the downswing, and then it needs to start decelerating. What you're doing is sitting into the left side really well, but you don't start turning your hips until late. And so that's why your left knee looks like it's not really moving right there. You're just kind of sitting into the left glute, which is great, but the left knee has to move over as well. And I'll show you, I'll demonstrate this stuff in a second. And then as you post up right there is great. So that post up move is really powerful. We just need a little bit more. So now your hips are a lot more open at impact because you've used your legs to open your hips. Whereas before, you were just kind of relying on your right leg to try and open the hips. And when you do that, you almost always lose the tush line. You did a better job than most for sure, but you'll still have a tendency to lose that tush line. So let's talk about the sequence a little bit more during that initial part. So here's what you did going back. You loaded up pretty well, and then watch my left knee and hip.
Okay.
See, I'm sitting to the left, but my left knee's not moving. This is just showing I'm not turning.
Yeah.
That initial peak hip rotation happens super early, right? So as you're starting to shift, you're turning your hips pretty quickly, and then they're starting to decelerate. So what you're really trying to do is turn the hips early while you're shifting over, and then your hips start to decelerate. And that's where that left leg, the way it's going to stop that hip rotation is by pushing up into the ground and pushing the hip back. Well, what you're doing is staying a little bit shut, getting a lot of load over here, but then turning, and instead it's turn and shift and then post up. Does that make sense?
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
So when we look at the, go ahead.
No, I just had I've heard you talk about this. I just had the wrong concept. Like I'm trying to stay closed longer, and but I need to accelerate the hips. I track along. Yeah.
So you stay closed with the shoulder. So think about it in terms of in a sequence. I'm sure you've heard about the kinematic sequence and all of that stuff. The hip rotation it spikes early and then it slows down really quickly. And then the shoulders spike and then the arms and then the club, right? And so you've seen that kind of curve. What most people do is they don't get that early hip rotation. And so instead they'll either drive hard laterally off the right. And so there's not much rotation at all. They'll do a closed hip slide and sit in here, which is great for loading up this hip, but then we won't have time to get the hip out of the way. So really what's happening is that that initial hip rotation, it starts to decelerate by the time that your left arm is about parallel to the ground. And most people think that they keep turning their hips as long as they can, as fast as they can. But really, it's a quick spike. It's a quick rotation. And now that this is loaded and I'm kind of squatted back to square, you've heard me talk about where that left arm is parallel to the ground, my hips are square. I'm no longer trying to like turn my hips like that. I'm trying to get ready to jump. I'm trying to get ready to post up. And even though, yes, my hip is turning, it's getting turned by my left leg pushing into the ground and pushing my hip back rather than me trying to turn my hips. Does that make sense?
I track along totally.
So that's what I want you to get to feel is that initial hip rotation's quick, but then we're decelerating really quick and we're getting ready to post up. So let's try that. And then this time, if you could tilt the camera down a little bit more so I could see your feet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so now you turn, but now we got to shift as well. So get more over to the left. More to the left. So you're just, now we've taken out that lateral move and we've just added rotation. We need both. Even more. No. So you're turning a little bit too far. So think about shifting to the left. Okay. I'll show you here. Let me just quickly run this through you and I'll show you. So now we did the opposite. We don't have enough lateral.
Okay.
I'll just show you real quick so you can see it and then it'll make a ton of sense. And again, narrowing your stance while you're practicing this will help quite a bit.
Okay.
So you see here, you're turning. And now you're turning open. Right? So, but there's no shift. We've got to shift all the way back over here. So let me show you what that looks like. So you're going back. And as that left arm's parallel to the ground, that's when you've shifted as much pressure to the right as you're going to shift, and you're starting to shift back to the left. During that initial phase, we're starting to kind of fall downhill into this left side, right? And loading that. But the hips are also beginning to turn. What you did is you took out that initial shift to the left and just turned. And so you don't look like you get all the way over there, right? So we need to fall into that left side because we're still trying to load that glute so that you can jump. Right? So that you can really push into the ground. So it's not just this, it's sitting in here and turning to get back to square. Once you get back to square, you don't really have to think about that hip rotation speed anymore. It's more about loading up that leg and pushing off of it. So let's work on the transition to get more weight over to the left side this time during that transition, like you were doing before, but we just add a little bit of hip rotation.
Got it.
Okay, so go to the transition and stop. So show me, okay, so right there, we need more weight onto the left leg. So your hip has to shift further to the left, but your knee, you're just turning your hips too far. You're only gonna turn back to about square.
Okay.
Better. It's closer there. Now, do you feel like you could jump off that left leg at that point?
Yes.
There you go. Good, there you go, good. Good. Do that from down the line for me for real quick. And push that left hip back more in the downswing. You don't need to get quite so open there with your hips. I want you to think about pushing your left hip back behind you a little bit more. You're turning a little too much. Better. Good. So this is the piece that you need. Now, in a second, I want you to do this with the club, and we're going to start to see how the club's going to shallow out for you. But this is the key, is that at first, you got to just kind of focus on this without a club, get your lower body to really wake up, because you really need to dramatically increase the force that you're putting into that left leg to recruit enough muscle fiber to make it do anything. So I want you to kind of keep focusing on that as you're going through your just initial early hip rotation. You have a tendency to kind of get your knee too far out like this.
Yeah.
Just be mindful of that. The knee just moves back in line with the foot. Just again, the simplest way to think about this is other things that you've done. If you were going to jump, you wouldn't move your knee out like this, right? It wouldn't make any sense. You're going to get your knee in line with your ankle and your hip. So in the downswing, we're just trying to do the same thing. It doesn't need to go that far. We're just trying to move over so that now these are in a line. When you're looking at it at the angle that my foot's at, they're going to be in line so that that's the most powerful position for me to be in. And then from there, we're just going to start to post up. But as you start to do this, we'll grab a club and we'll go left arm only, and we'll see how that club will start to shallow out for us now when you just focus on your hips. So go ahead and grab a club, left hand only.
Okay.
And let's do the same thing and just focus on your lower body. But I want you to turn down the line for me.
Down the line? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a lot of pulling with your arm. Relax that arm big time. You gotta give your hips time to do their thing. So even there, you're picking the club up with your left arm. I want you to think about turning your hips to start to move that club. Your left arm is working way too hard.
Okay.
So turn your hips better, relax the arm now, and just focus on your lower body. Let me show you that. You'll see your arm is pretty aggressive here. And you probably don't realize it. And that's what's going to get us steep. All right. So the first one that you did, you can see this is all left arm movement. Your left arm's moving away from you. It's rotating and picking the club up. And your hips have barely moved. By this point, this left knee should already be out over the toe. Your hips should be turned more so that the legs are waking up. Because remember, the legs are the first thing to move in the downswing, right? So if we don't get them loaded up immediately off the ball, then the arm will take over. And so what happens is your left arm is pretty loaded up here. Your left shoulder's already getting tight. And the hips are pretty relaxed still. They should already be really loaded up and ready to go. And instead this was the first one. And so then as you come down, the left arm really fires. And so it's getting everything out in front of us a little bit too much. And so we're getting the arm out. So we haven't shifted enough laterally there because our legs just weren't awake enough. Now move toward the end. And then here you got the arm kind of doing the same thing. So this is when I told you to focus on loading up your hips first.
Okay.
It's a little better, but you're still kind of you're not really loaded up on that right leg. But by this point, we should already be shifting back to the left. By the time your left arm's there, your pressure should be decreasing on the right and increasing on the left pretty significantly.
Got it. Okay. So Chuck, should I be moving a little bit more laterally to start the backswing and turning more? And then I got to think about going left a lot sooner.
Bingo. You nailed it. I just wanted to see the club here. The club did shallow out here better, but this is still not as good as I want it to be because you're still opening up there, but you just nailed it on the head. So the initial move off the ball is a little lateral shift to start to feel this right glute, but it's immediate, right? If you don't do it until your arm's already up here, by the time this gets loaded up, you've got so much stuff here that can't move nearly as fast as your arms. So if you're up here already and this left shoulder's tight and your grip's tight and the forearm's tight and you're still loading pressure over here, it's way too late, right? So you said exactly right. Immediately off the ball, you can use this, increase the pressure on the left to help you shift to the right a little. And so that's immediately starting to load up this right hip. So now by the time you're here, you've already maxed out pressure and you're starting to think about getting back to the left and then posting up. So yeah, if you feel immediately off the ball shifting, and then by the time your left arm's here and the left arm is getting pulled down by your hip turn, now you've maxed out pressure by the time the left foot or the left arm's parallel on the downswing. So yes, it's a little bit sooner, exactly.
Okay, sounds good.
Try it again. Try it again. So a little shift to the right first. There you go. A lot more dynamic. Let your hips turn a little bit more going back. You're restricting them a little too much.
Okay.
Better. Pretty good. One more. So that arm is still working too hard, but the lower body's getting better. But you're still not letting yourself load into your hips enough. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Because this is where, when you start loading up more in the backswing, then everything starts becoming more automatic.
Cool.
So you can see here, watch what's happening in your lower body versus the club. The club's moved 5 feet and your hips haven't moved at all. They haven't turned your hips at all, right? I can barely see your left leg. And literally by the time this left hand is here, that left knee should be moved forward out over your toe. That's showing hip turn. And I'll show you through this in a second, but you can see that you had a tendency, you probably moved more laterally that time, but you didn't allow yourself to rotate enough.
Okay.
But now the club's definitely shallowing out better. It's a lot shallower coming down, but we need to get that hip turn going back. So when you're looking at your swing from down the line, what you did was this. So yes, the right hip was loaded, but you can see my left knee didn't really move, but I feel load on this side. What I need is to turn. And so watch my left knee. See how it's out over my toe?
Yeah.
Right? That's happening almost immediately. So that by the time my arm's here, this left hip is starting to load. So now when you look at it from face on, it makes sense that I can fall into this left side to transition earlier. If I don't do that and I don't let my knee move and I just shift laterally, my arm's really loaded and my right hip's really loaded, but this isn't. This is taking a nap. So I'm actually letting my hips turn because your pelvis has to tilt down. Yours was kind of flat because you didn't really turn. Your pelvis goes down a little bit. And that makes it easier to shift more weight into the left side because you're already kind of rolling downhill, right? So immediately off the ball, this left knee has to come forward. That allows your hips to turn, which makes it a lot less restrictive with your upper body. You know, whereas before, if you don't let your hips turn at all and you swing your arm back that far, this thing's going to be so tight and so loaded up, it's going to rip coming down, right? Okay. So instead, little shift to the right, let the hips turn, the left knee come out. And now I don't feel quite so tight in my shoulders and rib cage until the transition. That's when I want this stuff to peak. Whereas if I go up here, I can still be relatively relaxed here. But then as I start to transition, that's where I get that dynamic stretch. So you've heard the whole X factor stuff. What really matters in that separation in your upper and lower halves is not really so much the X factor that you create going back. It's the X factor you create during the transition, that stretch, right? And if you're tight, you can't stretch anymore. There's nowhere else for it to go because you didn't let your hips turn. So as you allow yourself to shift your pelvis to the right and rotate, this will stay a little bit more relaxed, which will then buy you stretch. See, my hips don't have to move, or excuse me, my shoulders don't have to move, but I'm opening up my hips. I'm stretching this more dynamically when it matters in the swing. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And you're just helping me understand some bad concepts because I thought you were supposed to keep the hips pretty quiet immediately off the ball. So
and that's probably my fault because I've talked about that a lot. And the reason being is that most amateur golfers do what we call the lazy man's turn. Right? And this is what it is. If I just turn my pelvis and I don't really load any of my legs, this is what older golfers do. And you know, the majority of our work is with golfers in their 50s and 60s and on up who, you know, don't really do anything. They don't use their legs properly. So they just kind of do this. and then they wonder why they don't have any power. So for them, they're overactive with their lower body. And so we have to tell them, you've got to learn to separate the two because they don't feel that, right? But now for somebody like you, that information is not going to be applicable because you have a great ability to separate your upper and lower halves too much, right? So what really needs to happen is we need to separate the upper and lower half during the transition primarily. Obviously, it's going to turn more during the backswing, but you're overcooking that a little bit. And so that's where you're losing some of that dynamic stretch during the downswing and some of these things, like you can't stop ripping your left arm through. When you feel this right, your left arm and shoulder are going to chill out a lot. They're going to be able to relax during the backswing so that we keep them in reserve until later in the downswing.
Totally understand. And the other thing I was going to say, conceptually, I thought you were supposed to squeeze the towel on the way back, and you kind of kept that in the transition versus you really get that squeeze in the transition. That's where you do it. Okay, good.
Exactly. And again, a lot of the stuff that I've posted on there is about applying to golfers who do it this way, right? So they don't feel any separation at all. So we start to get them to feel that right away. And for them, that's a really foreign feeling. For somebody like you can't be, I would tell you the opposite, right? I'm telling you, you need to turn immediately so that this stays a little bit more open. But now if I took an older golfer and said, turn your hips right away, they'd look like this in the backswing, right? So it's a little bit difficult. I'm trying to kind of speak to a wide audience and it's not always applicable to everybody, but for sure. But I need to do a better job explaining that to golfers like you because you're going down the wrong path.
Oh, no, not at all. This is great. So, so I guess for me, I just need to, load the hips and turn a little bit more off the ball.
This is what's fun for you though, because you're going to start to be able to use your legs again. Whereas before you had kind of like restricted them so much that you had no choice. You had no place else to move from, but your upper half and your arms and shoulders. So now you get to do the fun stuff. You get to load up on this left leg, let this knee come forward, feel more load in your glutes, and feel a lot of leg work coming down. And that's fun stuff. That's not restrictive stuff. That's freeing yourself up to have a lot more power. So that's exactly where I would tell you to go, is start paying attention as you're looking down the line that this left knee, again, you don't want to do this stuff and start like, reverse pivoting and stuff like you're not going to do that. But the left knee has to be allowed to come forward as you turn and you load, and you just need to do it sooner. And once this is loaded up, it becomes kind of automatic, especially for somebody as good as you, to start to use your hips coming down. But if you don't load them up going back and you load this arm instead, then you won't be able to get out of those habits of just ripping the arms down. So this would be a big, big change for you in terms of sequencing, right? Because you now it's not so much freeing up your hips, it's loading up your hips. And then once you start to feel that, then all of a sudden you're going to be like, dude, I feel like I have so much more power and I have more control over the club because you're no longer throwing it from the top and chasing it, right? Because you already have so many awesome fundamentals in your swing. We just have to shallow out the swing plane slightly, but we'll never do that if your arms are firing as the first thing, right? The only way to get your arms to stop firing first is to take the tension out of them and put the tension somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Sure does. Sure does.
Any questions for me or?
No, I know we need to conclude. Can you just see if I get off the ball correctly with the hips and then?
Yeah, for sure.
We'll just call it. Okay.
Yeah, let me see what's going. Let me see.
Well, it'd be.
Do that. I'm going to record one. So do that for me again. Yeah, exactly. So the right knee is going to straighten a little. You don't want it to get too straightened because you want to maintain that load in there, right? There you go. Now feel how that would help you in the transition since that left knee is forward, how you can sit into the left side easier. And there you go. Dude, do that again for me. All right, so let's just take a quick look at that one. I know that, it was static, the first one. It wasn't dynamic per se, but what I wanted you to see from that is how the club starts to get back down on plane for you without you having to do anything. So yeah, so first, now this is where you let the right leg, straighten up maybe a little bit too much at first because you're trying to really feel that. But yes, see how the left knee is now forward, out over the toe. So now that you've got your pelvis, you can see your belt line is tilted, right?
Got it.
So now we can start to fall into that left side during the transition. So weight shift becomes automatic, right? You're not having to think, oh, I have to push really hard off my right leg. Whereas before, you had to drive kind of harder off the right to make yourself shift. Now we're just letting gravity do the weight shift for us. So once you're there, then what I wanted you to see is how the club shallowed out. I think it was this one, yeah. So that's an exaggeration there, but now you can see how your hips are back to square, but see how your legs look loaded, right? Instead
Yes.
of before, your right leg was starting to straighten up a little bit already and move into the ball a little bit, but now you're still able to create force into the ground with both feet. And that's what that squat is for. That's what it's supposed to look like. And now the club, this is a little bit exaggerated, but the club is shallowed out now. So now you can start coming back from the inside a little bit more without having to try and manipulate it and trying to make it happen with your hands. So now from here, we don't want that where your arms are a little bit stuck, but that is something I seriously doubt you would do that in your real swing, but your arms are a little jammed up there because you kept it back a little bit too far, but you didn't do that in your real swing at all. I seriously doubt that's going to happen. But what I'm really interested in is, are you starting to use your legs? That looks way better. And then there you just kind of drove and turned too much instead of getting posted up. That's what, I'll just walk you through that real quick so I can show you what happened there. In your regular swing, you had a great release, your arms are in a great position. But now as you start to turn your hips, if you don't stop trying to turn by pushing from the right side, your arms never get a chance to get back out in front of your body, so you get a little jammed up here. Instead, now that we're here, we shift and we're back to square. But remember, we don't want to keep turning this way because then our arms get stuck. It's not so much driving off this right hip to turn. The turning is kind of done. It's now pushing up to push the hip back. And now you can see my arms have this width here. But if I keep pushing from the right side, my right elbow gets trapped up against that hip. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
So early rotation of the hips during that transition, and then think no more turning, no more trying to turn your belt buckle to the target. Yes, your belt buckle is going to get turned to the target, but that's happening not from you trying to turn your hips. It's happening from you pushing into the ground and pushing your hip back. And so we're creating vertical force at that point. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
All right,
awesome.
So yeah, so hopefully that kind of puts all the pieces together. Now you know how to let your hips turn a little bit and be a little less restrictive there, and then start to really feel your legs post up there instead of trying to keep turning, right? There's a balance between this rotational force, lateral movement, and vertical force, right? And right now, as you did it there, you've got before you had a lot of lateral, not quite as much. Now you've got a lot of rotational. We don't need that much. We need to put that more vertical in there.
Got it, Chuck. Well, thanks for your help. I really appreciate it. It gives me some great stuff to work on.
You bet. You got a great swing, dude. Once you get your legs working again, you're going to be back off to the races, I promise.
Thanks, bro. Really appreciate the help today.
All right, you bet. Take care.
Thanks. Have a nice one.
You too.